And today we are joined by Ken Johnson. Ken is a horticulture educator. This is the second session in our Good Growing in Illinois webinar series. Last week we were with Andrew Holsinger, and the next week we will be chatting with me, and I will be talking about landscape safety. And then the week after that, that'll be May 27th, we will be with Katie Parker, and she'll be talking about mulch in the garden. But today it's all about the good bugs in the garden. They are not all bad, and so would like to ask everyone to please keep your microphones muted. Please keep your videos turned off. I know sometimes Zoom can join you automatically in a meeting with your video and mics on, but please mute yourself and turn off your video once you get into the meeting. And also, if you have questions, please type those into the chat box. Ken will answer those at the end of the program. And for right now, we have Ken Johnson. Ken.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Hopefully everybody can hear me. So like Chris mentioned, we're going to talk about the good bugs in the garden. So a lot of times when we see bugs, we think they're bad. And I'm assuming most of you are on here because you do at least somewhat enjoy insects. So I may be preaching to the choir a little bit for part of this, but we'll see. All right. So first off, Kai, why do we really even care about bugs or insects to begin with? Well, they're everywhere. So 95% of all animals on Earth are invertebrates. 80% of those invertebrates are arthropods, what we typically would call bugs. So our spiders, centipedes, millipedes, insects, stuff like that. So a vast majority of animal life on Earth are going to be what we would consider bugs in layman's terms. Um, Insects, as a group, account for over 75% of all animal species. So there's 900,000 known species of insects. You compare that to mammals, we only have named over 5,000 species of mammals, 9 to 10,000 species of birds. So again, insects completely dwarf all other types of animals um, on Earth. And just a little random trivia for you here. Ran across this. So for every human, it's estimated there are about 1.4 billion insects on Earth. So if we have about 7.4 billion people on Earth, at any time there are about 10 quintillion insects. So not only are there more species, there's just a lot more of them out there as well. They're everywhere. So we need to at least be a little bit aware of them and hopefully appreciate them a little bit. So who cares? Again, this is kind of the view of the general public. I'm assuming since you're listening to this webinar, you may not be in that boat. So again, probably preaching to the choir a little bit, but a lot of times we have the approach of let's just kill them all. There's really no point to them. The only good bug is a dead bug is the perspective a lot of people take. Um, Last several years, as the plight of pollinators has been in the news more and more, people are kind of coming around to that. Well, we can keep the bees, we can keep the butterflies, we can keep the pollinators around, but everything else, we don't really need that. And that's not really the case. Um, but there are some good reasons people do not like insects. So a lot of them, there are quite a few that are pests, so they cause damage on our crops. So you can see those top two pictures there, feeding on corn and tomato fruitworm, corn earworm. Um, we have our ornamental pests, so we have stuff like our Japanese beetles that come out and defoliate our roses, our lindens, stuff like that. Um, in our natural areas, so we have, again, some more invasives, stuff like gypsy moth, emerald ash borer coming in, gypsy moth defoliating trees, emerald ash borer killing all of our ash trees. We have our structural pests, so we've got carpenter ants, termites, stuff like that. Our human and livestock pests as well, so mosquitoes feeding on blood, transmitting disease, cause issues as well. And these insects get most of the attention, and for good reason, because they do cause quite a few problems for us. But less than 1% of all insects are actually considered to be pests. That means, 99+% are either beneficial to us or they're just kind of there. So all these other insects, they are food for other animals. So food for birds. According to Doug Tallamy, you may have heard of him, Bringing Nature Home. He's a pretty famous entomologist, environmentalist. So he says about 96% of all terrestrial birds in North America rear their young on insects. So if our insect populations, drop, our bird populations are going to drop. A lot of freshwater game fish, trout, bass, stuff like that feed on insects. even a lot of mammals or small mammals, foxes, raccoons, skunks, even bears, when food is scarce, will feed on insects. So they're kind of towards the bottom of that food pyramid. So we have our plants and then probably our insects, and then we start getting into our higher level organisms. Decomposers, so they break down um, dead animals. So in the middle there, that burying beetle will feed on on carrion, stuff like that. Those termites you don't want in your house, they are in nature out recycling dead plant material, dead trees, stuff like that, breaking down those plants, returning those nutrients into the soil so that plants can then take them up again. A lot of our insects will feed on other insects. So they provide a lot of good pest control. If you thought we had bad pest problems now, if we got rid of our beneficial insects, we would have an unbelievably high number of insect pests out there. And then pollination. Again, when we talk about insects as beneficial, most of the attention is on insects as they're acting as pollinators. And again, for good reason. So again, pest control. When we think about a lot of our real serious insect pests that we have, our Japanese beetles, emerald ash borer, gypsy moth, these insects are not native to North America. They were introduced accidentally. In most cases, in the case of gypsy moth, they were actually purposely brought here. But they have escaped, and they wreak havoc because they have been kind of released from their natural enemies. Those insects, those diseases that typically would control them in their natural areas, they are not present here in the United States or in North America, so those populations can run rampant. So when we do have those pests around or those predators around, they do a good job of keeping those populations down. So a lot of our native pests are controlled by these parasites, these predators, and these diseases, keeping those pest populations down. That's probably next to pollination. That's probably the most important thing insects are going to do for us, at least from a human perspective. And again, insects, pollinators. So a lot of our plants cannot reproduce without the help of insects. 75% of all plant species need to be pollinated by animals in some way, and that's over 90% of flowering plants need some sort of animal or insect interaction with those flowers in order to be pollinated. Those plants these insects are pollinating are going to provide food for not only humans but as well for wildlife. So about a third of our food supply, we have to have some sort of pollination for those plants to produce about 150 food crops in the United States. When we think of pollinators, a lot of times we're thinking about bees. There are a lot of other insects that will pollinate plants. We have our butterflies, our moths, wasps, beetles, flies. Some plants will be pollinated by ants. There's a lot of different insects that will do pollination. And we'll talk about some of those in more detail in a little bit. So you may remember this is kind of a marketing thing that Whole Foods did back in 2013. So the picture on the left there is what you would see in a typical produce section for this particular Whole Foods store. They went through, removed all of those fruits and vegetables that require pollination by insects, and this is what the produce section would look like. So we've lost kind of our obvious stuff like apples, um, our small berries, our raspberries, blackberries, stuff like that. But even some of our vegetables that we wouldn't typically think of, our onions, our carrots, a lot of our herbs, we're not eating the fruit of those plants, but if those plants are not pollinated, they don't produce any seed, and then we are not able to grow more of those plants. So it's not just the fruits we would lose, it's some of our vegetables as well. So just some examples of some of those fruits and vegetables that do require pollination from insects. So again, a lot of our fruits are apples, small berries, all our cucurbit crops, so our cucumbers, our pumpkins, our squash, um, stuff like that. Our sunflowers for eating sunflower seeds or using the oil for those to cook with. We will lose those as well. And there are also other fruits that do not necessarily need to be pollinated by insects, but from a human perspective, it's better because we tend to get larger fruit and more of it. So you can see the picture on the bottom there. The strawberry on the left, those flowers have been cross-pollinated by insects, so insects have been able to access those flowers, pick up that pollen, and transfer that to flower. And those are the kind of the strawberries we want to buy or we want to grow in our backyard, those nice, large, plump fruit. Look on the picture on the left. For this experiment, they put little bags over individual flowers so that either no insects and no wind could get to them, so that's the self-pollination, or their openings are big enough that airflow could get through there, so they would be wind pollinated. And you can see there those strawberries are much smaller. It's not something we want to buy from the grocery store. If we were to get those in our garden, we would not be terribly excited about that. From the strawberries perspective, it's still going to have viable seed. They can still reproduce. But again, from the human perspective, we want those fruits to be cross-pollinated so we get more of them and they are better looking and larger. Same thing goes for tomatoes. If you have insects present, you tend to get more tomatoes present than they were just self-pollinating or wind pollinating. So just kind of the basics on kind of why we need insects, why they are important, why we don't want to go out and kill all of them. Now we'll talk about some of the different types of insects that we may encounter in our landscapes, in our gardens. And this is not an exhaustive list, but just some examples of some of the stuff out there that you may encounter. And hopefully you'll be able to, if you see these, you'll know that they are good and you won't try to get rid of them. So when we talk about our natural enemies, we can break these down to kind of 3 categories. So we have our predators. These are going to be insects that are going to go around. They're going to feed on other insects. That is going to be their primary food source. Either the larvae or the adults or both can do this. So that top picture there, that mite on the right, that is one of our predatory mites. On the left is 2-spot spider mite. This is a pretty common mite pest we get in a lot of our ornamental plants. But these little red mites next to them there, they are predatory. They'll run around. They will feed on other mites. They'll feed on eggs, stuff like that. Typically, our predatory mites, they're going to be much faster moving. So if you see a mite running around rather quickly, more than likely that's going to be a predatory mite, not one of our plant feeding mites. You probably don't need to be concerned with the presence of those. It's actually a good thing to have those around. On the bottom there, on the left, we have our aphid lion, our lacewing larvae. So these are go around, they'll feed on soft-bodied insects. On the right, we have our ladybugs, our lady beetles. Both the adults and the larvae of those will feed on insects, aphids, and again, another small soft-bodied insects. We have our parasites or our parasitoids. So these are probably my favorite type of insects here. So picture on the top there, we have a small parasitoid wasp. So again, these are not the large wasps we typically think of. These are, again, this is laying an egg in an aphid, so you can kind of get a feeling of how small these are. What they'll do, they'll lay their egg inside the aphid. That egg will hatch. The wasp larvae will eat the inside of the aphid, eventually killing it. So our parasitoids, those young are going to develop on one host. They'll eventually kill it. They will emerge, and they'll then go around and attack others. Same thing with that sphinx moth on the bottom there. You can see all those white things. Those are the cocoons of those wasps that are inside that caterpillar eating it. They've kind of burst out. They've spun their cocoons, and then they will emerge and go and attack other insects. Middle picture, those little white squiggly things, those are nematodes. So this particular pupa of a moth or a butterfly got infected by that. They've kind of eaten the inside of that, and it's broken open, and you've got thousands of nematodes that'll go out into the soil and attack other insects and stuff. Not really going to talk about pathogens in this presentation, but just like humans, just like plants, insects have diseases that they'll get, the fungus and stuff that will kill them. So this is an example of that, all that white fluffy stuff, that's a fungus that's infected this caterpillar and killed it. So when we get nice, wet, cool weather, kind of like we have now, it's good for plant disease and it's also good for insect disease. So that can maybe one of the benefits of having a cooler, wetter spring. We may have some more diseases in our insects. So the first group of bugs, so to speak, we'll talk about are our spiders. Again, a lot of people don't necessarily like spiders, but they are incredibly beneficial in our landscapes. In Illinois, we have about 630 species of spiders. And spiders, they're all predatory. They're going to be feeding on insects and other small arthropods, what have you. Again, we can kind of break these up in different ways. So on the left there, we have some of our web building spiders. So on the bottom, you have in the middle there that sheet web spider. So they kind of make these sheet-like platforms on plants. A lot of times you see them early in the morning when we have a dew on shrubs or grass, stuff like that. They'll catch insects with that. On the left, we have our funnel web spider. So again, they kind of build these sheet-like webs, but they have a funnel on one end where the spider will hang out, and they'll capture prey that way. And then on the top there, we have our orb weavers. Again, those build these large webs that span distances, tree branches in between a tree and your house, stuff like that. And again, as flying insects are going through there, they will catch those and eat those. Then on our right, we have some of our more kind of active type feeding. So these spiders are not necessarily spinning webs. On the top, we've got our jumping spider. So you can see these a lot in gardens and landscapes. They're kind of run around, and they'll actually kind of run after prey or ambush their prey and feed on it. Kind of the same thing with that crab spider there on that flower. These will hang out on flowers. They will catch insects visiting them, so they're a good chance they're feeding on pollinators, but they're still not something you want to get rid of. And then on the right there, stuff like our wolf spiders, fishing spiders, stuff like that. Some of our larger spiders, again, we find those a lot of times in turf and other areas of our landscape. Again, they are feeding on insects. These spiders are going to be controlling, again, a lot of our pest species that are out there. So if you see a spider, don't get rid of it. If it's inside your house, scoop it up, put it outside. Um, it'll catch some bad bugs for you. Praying mantids is another one we commonly encounter in our landscapes. So both the adults and the nymphs or the young are going to be predators, so they're going to be feeding on other insects. Obviously, the adults are going to be feeding on larger insects than the young are. They lay their eggs in ootheca, and that's kind of a frothy mass. You can see that in the picture on the left, that female laying some eggs. And the picture on the top right there, that is an ootheca with all those mantids hatching out of it. So those eggs are inside that kind of that frothy mass there. Praying mantids will capture and try to eat. They'll try to eat basically anything they can capture. And a lot of times you'll see these in gardening magazines and stuff selling the ootheca for pest control. They're not necessarily the best at controlling pests because they're cannibalistic, so they'll eat each other. And again, they eat kind of everything. So if you see them in your garden, I would not get rid of them. They're good to have, but I probably would not spend any money buying the ootheca to put out in your garden in the hopes of getting pest control, because you usually only end up with a couple praying mantids. They'll disperse or they'll eat each other, and you only end up with a couple in your landscape. They don't really do all that great of a job of doing a lot of pest control for us. So good to have in the garden, but I wouldn't necessarily go out of my way trying to introduce them into the garden or spending money on the ootheca to release them in your garden. Stink bugs. A lot of times we think of stink bugs as pests. We've got our brown marmorated stink bug that's starting to show up more and more around the state. That's the one that's trying to get into your house in the fall. We've got some other native stink bugs, brown stink bug, green stink bugs that are pest insects. But there are some beneficial stink bugs. So an example of this would be our spine soldier bug. They get that name. You can see the picture on the top there. They kind of have these spines on the shoulder area of their body. They're about ½ inch long. Again, that kind of that brown color as adults. Underneath that, you can see the nymphs. So they kind of start off as black and red, and they'll lighten over time until they reach the adult stage. Like other stink bugs, they have a straw-like mouthpart. So what they will do is they will stick this into an insect and suck out the internal juices, kind of like a juice box. So you can see that on the picture on the bottom there. That stink bug has caught a caterpillar and is now feeding on it. So if you see stink bugs out in your garden, there's a good chance it's probably going to be a pest, but take a little bit of a closer look and see if it's a spine soldier bug or something like that. Make sure it is actually a pest before you try to get rid of it. Some of our other true bugs, so technically these are the types of insects we should be calling bugs. We have our assassin bugs. So you can see the picture in the middle on the top there. That's our wheel bug feeding on, I believe that's a Japanese beetle or some other type of scarab beetle. So again, they have these sucking mouth parts that they'll stick into their prey and suck the juices out. Those wheel bugs, a lot of times you start seeing those more and more in the fall, kind of as our insect populations start going downhill. It seems like they kind of like to aggregate on houses and stuff. It's usually when I see them most often. On the top right there, that is one of the ambush bugs. Again, another predatory species. And one way you can tell if an insect is going to be a predator or if it's going to be a plant feeder is by looking at the mouth parts. So those two bugs on the left there, these are some of our leaf-footed bugs. So these are plant pests. If you look at those mouth parts on that bottom picture, you can see that real long, slender mouth parts. I don't know if you can see my mouse or not, but kind of in the middle there, our plant feeding bugs have real long, slender mouth parts opposed to our predatory species, like on the picture on the bottom right. You can see they have much shorter, much thicker mouth parts. So that's one way you could tell apart. Short, thick mouth parts it's a predator, you probably want to leave it in your garden. If it's long and skinny, more than likely that's going to be a pest species, and you may want to get rid of that if you have quite a few of them. And the same thing would go for the stink bugs as well. So those are the type we do not want. Just some other types of bugs. So the minute pirate bug, see these little black and white insect on the left there. So again, these are smaller, about 1/8 of an inch long, kind of oval shaped. And they are again feeding on smaller insects, so insect eggs, spider mites, aphids, insects like that. Those nymphs, orange kind of teardrop shape. They have red eyes. So again, if you see something like that, again, something you want to leave out in your garden. Our damsel bugs on the right there, they kind of look like little miniature assassin bugs. Again, kind of generalist predators. They'll feed on a wide variety of different types of insects. A lot of times you see these kind of more in grasses. They tend to prefer grass habitats. So you may kind of see those on the perimeters of your ornamental beds and stuff like that, depending on how your garden's set up. But again, feeding on other smaller insects and controlling those for us, or managing those populations for us. Green lacewing, aphid lion. So I mentioned this when we first started. So the green lacewing on the left, that is what the adult looks like. A lot of times we see these at night near lights. The adults are primarily feeding on pollen, honeydew, which is a secretion that aphids and some of our other insects will release, and nectar. So they are not necessarily predators. The larval stage in the middle there, those are the predators. So you can see they look kind of like little miniature alligators. They have 2 sickle-shaped mouth parts, and what they'll do, again, they will stick those into their prey, suck the juices out like a juice box. Again, a wide variety of things they'll feed on, so aphids, mites, mealybugs, caterpillars, scale, insects, eggs, all kinds of different things. Picture on the right there, those are the eggs of these insects, so these are laid up on stalks. So if you see something like this, a lot of times when I see them, if you have house plants kind of on your porch or on your deck and you have lights on at night, a lot of times you will see these eggs on there. So if you see something like that, that's probably something you should encourage, you want to have around. Don't necessarily remove those from those plants. Those lacewing larvae, those aphid lions will hatch out of there, and then they'll go around and control some insects for you. Lady beetles, ladybugs, whatever you want to call them. Again, this is one beneficial, one natural enemy a lot of people are familiar with. So both the adults and the larvae are going to be predaceous. They're going to feed on primarily aphids, but there are some species that'll feed primarily on mealybugs. So again, depending on the species, it may vary a little bit, but they're going to be feeding on small, soft-bodied insects primarily. So here this is the convergent lady beetle. Larvae can consume up to 50 aphids a day, or as an adult, they can feed about 50 aphids a day. The larvae will eat quite a few, probably about 200 to 300 as it's going through its development. So again, these can do a pretty good number on our aphid populations. And again, a lot of times we get questions into offices. Picture in the middle there, those are the larvae. People do not know those are ladybug larvae, so a lot of times they've gone ahead and killed them and want to know what they are. So again, make sure you identify what you're trying to kill. Make sure you're not getting rid of something that you actually want to have in your garden. And then on the right there, those are what the eggs look like, so kind of yellow football shape, again, kind of laid in clusters. So if you see something like that, pretty good chance those are probably lady beetle eggs, and you want to keep those around. Ground beetles. So this is one people tend to overlook quite a bit. So these beetles, this is a really large group of insects, of beetles. These beetles tend to have, they're kind of shiny. Most of the time they're going to be black, and you can see on these they have these kind of ridges on their wing covers, their elytra, so on the back part of their bodies. That is one way to identify them. A lot of times we'll find if you've got more of a wooded area, you're lifting up logs, leaves, stuff like that, you will find these. The kind of out of the way areas is where you tend to find them the most. But both the adults and the larvae are going to be predators. So again, they're going to feed on a wide variety of different insects, whether that be caterpillars, beetle larvae, snails, a lot of these other pest insects that we have out there. Just one example of those we start seeing more and more this time of year is the fiery searcher, so active from May through November, and the adults of these beetles can actually live for a couple of years sometimes. These beetles, both the adults and the larvae, are going to feed primarily on caterpillars. So we really start seeing these show up more and more this time of year because our trees are starting to leaf out. Our caterpillar populations in those trees are starting to build up. So you'll see these beetles primarily at night scurrying around. They'll run up and down trees and feed on caterpillars like tent caterpillar um, and stuff like that. So these are a good thing to have around. They're also very pretty beetle. They got that nice green and purple iridescent color to them. They're about an inch and a half long, so a fairly good sized beetle. And if you do pick them up, they will bite you, give you a little pinch. It's not going to break the skin or anything, but you will know they are not happy with you if you pick them up. Another type of predatory beetle that we have are going to be our soldier beetles. These are a little different than what we typically think of as beetles. So these do not have those real hard elytra or those kind of wing coverings. They're actually kind of leathery. So a lot of people actually don't think these are beetles because they do not have those real hard shells on them, so to speak. The adults, a lot of times we start seeing these in the fall when the goldenrod and stuff is starting to bloom. They will feed on that pollen and nectar, so they're considered to be pollinators. A lot of times those adults are going to be yellow or red, and they have those black patterns on the thorax, that middle segment, and the abdomen as well. And the larvae are going to be predaceous. So again, these are feeding on insect eggs and other types of insect larvae, beetles, caterpillars, what have you, that are in the soil or in leaf litter. So these are going to be, again, a little more of a ground predator. Syrphid flies, so these are these little, some people will call these sweat bees. So you see these, start seeing these more and more in the summer. Little flies, little buzz around. They are bee mimics. So again, people get these confused with bees a lot. Again, they have that black and yellow patterning. A couple different ways you can tell bees and flies apart. So flies, you can see in that top picture there, their eyes actually touch, or they're going to be very close to touching, whereas bees do not. Flies only have one pair of wings. Bees have two pairs of wings. And a lot of our fly species are not going to be very hairy, whereas bees are. Again, you have to get fairly close to be able to see some of these differences, and a lot of people are not comfortable with that, but there are some ways you can tell them apart fairly easily. You can also look at the antenna. You can see on that picture on that fly, those antennae are going to be much shorter than bee antennae are going to be. So the adults, again, bee mimics, we see them visiting flowers quite a bit, so they're feeding on that pollen and that nectar. So again, they are considered pollinators. What they're going to do is they will fly around, they will search for aphids and aphid colonies. What they'll do is they will lay their eggs in or near those aphid colonies. Those eggs will hatch, and the larvae, their maggots, since they're flies, will hatch out of there, and that's that picture on the bottom there. It just kind of looks like a big blob of goo, but they'll go around and feed on aphids and again other soft-bodied insects. Some of them can feed up to 400 aphids, feed on up to 400 aphids kind of during their development. So again, they can do a lot of damage to our aphid populations. So this is one thing. If you have a lot of aphids, look for these insects, look for ladybug larvae, stuff like that. Look for some of these predators before you start going and controlling some of these insect pests that we have. Yellowjackets, hornets, and wasps. So again, these are some insects people don't necessarily like, but again, they are beneficial in our landscapes. So for most of these, the adults, they are feeding on pollen and nectar, maybe some other insects as well. But these are what all the adults of these would be considered pollinators because they are visiting flowers and they will transfer some pollen from flower to flower. But all of them will also go out and they will capture other insects. So, caterpillars. Some of them will feed on spiders, not necessarily these, like mud daubers and stuff may feed on spiders. A lot of other insects, they'll actually catch these. They'll bring these back to the nest and feed those to their larvae. So again, these are doing a lot of pest control for us. Obviously, if you have these near, your house, near an area where you frequently travel, then yes, you probably want to get rid of those nests, but they're kind of out of the way. Leave those there, and they will do so. They will be a benefit to you in the garden. And these colonies are going to be annual. So if you see that big bald-faced hornet nest up in a tree, they're not going to return to that next year. Once we get a couple hard frosts, that colony will die out, and they will not be back there the next year. Same thing with our yellowjackets. If they're nesting in the ground, if it's out of the way, just leave that there. They will not. They should not be in that same area next year. They're annual colonies. Cicada killer is another one that you may encounter. So these are larger wasps. What they will do is they will build their nests in the ground. So they tend to like well-drained, kind of light textured soils and full sun. So a lot of times a little more of a sandy soil. A lot of times you may see them along sidewalks, patios, driveways, stuff like that. So you can see the picture on the right there on the top. That's what the entrance to that tunnel looks like. So they'll excavate that, and on the bottom there, you can see they'll make this big long tunnel. What they'll do is the females will fly up into trees. They will catch cicadas. They will sting them, paralyze them. They'll drag them down into that hole. They will lay eggs on them. Those eggs will hatch, and those larvae will eat those cicadas while they're still alive and paralyzed. The males of these are territorial, so if you have some of these in your yard, the males will get up in your face and try to scare you off from that area. Again, easier said than done, but males cannot sting, so you don't have to be worried about them. It's easy for me to say when they're not in my face. But again, like our yellowjackets, hornets, and wasps, these are not kind of out to get you. As long as you leave them alone, they will leave you alone. Really, the only time you get stung by these is if you were to step on one of them. Wasp and hornets are not going out of their way to try to get you. Leave them alone. For the most part, they'll leave you alone and control some insects for you. Parasitoid wasps, so I mentioned this earlier. So for these parasitoid wasps, the eggs are laid in or on their hosts. So again, eventually these larvae will kill their hosts, but not before they complete their own development and leave. The adults are going to be feeding primarily on honeydew, pollen, or nectar. So if you want to have these parasitoid wasps around, you need to have some of those food sources for the adults so they'll stick around. So top there again, that aphid, it's laying the egg inside that aphid. Bottom picture there, laying an egg inside of a caterpillar there. I believe that's a caterpillar of a gypsy moth. So among all natural enemies, no other group is more important to maintaining pest insect populations below damaging level than parasitoids. So there are other types of parasitoids beside wasp. There are some flies that are parasitoids. But these do a lot of our pest population. We don't notice them because they are so small. A lot of times these larvae are developing inside of the insects. We don't really even see them kind of getting killed. So some things to look for to see if some of your pest populations have parasitoids in them. A lot of times, if an insect is parasitized, they will change color. So you can see in the picture on the right there, on the top, those aphids, you can see some of them, they're kind of typically green or reddish there. For these aphids, they're becoming mummies, so they're getting kind of papery looking. If you see a lot of these aphid mummies around, probably don't need to do anything about that population because those parasitoid wasps are around and they may do a good job of controlling them for you. Sometimes that host may have eggs, larvae, pupa, the cocoons attached to the outside of their body. So again, that picture on the bottom, those are the cocoons of all those wasps that were inside of that caterpillar. They've emerged, and again, they will fly off and attack other caterpillars. You may see exit holes left in those insects in the bodies of those dead hosts. I don't think there's any in that picture on the top on the aphids, but on aphids, there'll be a nice circular hole cut in the back of that aphid where that insect has emerged from. On the bottom picture there, you can see that in the middle of that caterpillar down towards the bottom. Again, some of those cocoons, the tops of those are missing. Those wasps have emerged from there. They also may have some unusual behavior, so they may stop feeding. So some of these caterpillars, they will not be feeding anymore. They may just kind of hang out on plant stems. They won't really move at all. They're just kind of there basically because their insides are getting eaten out. So some things to look for to see if you do have some of these parasitoids in your pest populations. Last group of insects we'll talk about are some of our pollinators. So here, these are pollinator syndromes. If you're not familiar with what a pollinator syndrome is, these are the flower characteristics or traits that may appeal to a particular type of pollinator. So you can look at these characteristics on a flower, and you can use those to predict what type of insect may be pollinating that particular plant. Again, these aren't set in stone. They're just kind of guidelines, generalities. But you can kind of get an indication of what type of insect may pollinate a particular flower by looking at these characteristics. And we'll talk about each of these groups individually. So for our beetles, flowers tend to be white or green. And again, half my pictures are on goldenrod, yellow flowers. So again, not set in stone. Nectar guides are not present. And when we get to bees, I'll discuss what nectar guides are. Odor, because beetles are so diverse, a lot of it just depends on what type of beetle that flower is trying to attract. So they can be no smell, it can be strongly fruity, or be more of a foul, rotting type smell, again, depending on the type of insect it's trying to attract. Nectar is sometimes present. Beetles are not really after the nectar. Primarily, for most of our beetle pollinators, they're going to be after the pollen. So these plants tend to produce a lot of pollen. Flowers kind of are large, bowl-shaped, like that magnolia flower in the middle there on the right, or more of our small cluster type flowers like goldenrod and other plants like that. Our flies kind of break up flies into two different pollinator syndromes depending on the type of fly. So we have our carrion fly, or carrion flowers. So these flowers tend to be dark brown or purple. They're kind of mimicking rotting flesh. Again, nectar guides are not present because they're mimicking rotting flesh or dung. They do not smell particularly good, so they can have more of that putrid smell. Again, that nectar is usually absent. That pollen is limited. These flowers are tricking those flies into thinking that this is something they can lay their eggs on. So those flies will visit those flowers, they'll search for somewhere to lay their eggs. You can see in this particular fly, it's being covered in pollen. Eventually they'll realize this is not something I can lay my eggs in, and they will go off, from the plant's perspective, hopefully to another flower and transfer that pollen from flower to flower. So they're not necessarily providing a lot of these resources for those flies to feed on. Flowers tend to be shallow or funnel-like, or more of a complex with a trap. So Jack on the Pulpit would be an example of one of those with that trap. This picture here, this is pawpaw. So if you have pawpaw trees, I've heard of people, especially commercial production, they actually go and put chicken out in their plantings when the plants are getting ready to bloom. So that chicken starts rotting, that will draw in more flies and they'll get better pollination on those plants. So if you want to grow out pawpaws, may not be something you want to put right by your window. Flowers can be a little stinky. Then we have our flower flies. So again, our syrphid flies. On the bottom there, a bee fly. So again, these flowers, white, cream, pale. And I have yellow flowers in my pictures. Nectar guides are not necessarily present. Odor, musty to sweet. Again, that nectar is present. They will feed on that. Pollen, not the main attractant for these insects. It's primarily nectar they're after. Flower shape is that flat or bowl-shaped, or they have that shallow corolla. And the corolla is just kind of all those petals put together is what we would call a corolla. Our moths. So moths, this is describing night flying moths. So these flowers tend to be pale red, purple, pink, or white. And sometimes they see these white flowers kind of glow in the dark. They'll reflect moonlight and kind of give them an appearance of glowing. Nectar guides are not present. It's dark out. They won't be able to see them anyway. The odor is strong and sweet. And again, since their pollinators are coming out at night, a lot of times these flowers will release that odor at night, or it'll be strongest at night in order to best attract their pollinators. That nectar is going to be ample and deeply hidden. You can see the picture on the bottom right there. Some of these moths can have incredibly long tongues. So if you have this nectar down deep inside the flower, only the moths can get to them, and other pollinators won't be able to access it. Pollen is limited. Their mouths are like straws, so they are not chewing on this, feeding on this pollen. Basically, there's enough pollen for that moth to pick up and transfer from flower to flower. Flower shape, regular, what we typically think of as a flower, or more of a tubular without a lip. Sometimes these, like the picture on the top left there, some of these moths can hover when they feed. They don't necessarily land. And butterflies, bright red, purple in color. Again, a lot of our flowers that we find attractive, butterflies also find attractive. Nectar guides are present, faint but fresh odor, so again, a little more of a pleasing smell. Again, ample, deeply hidden nectar because they do have longer mouth parts they can access. that stuff that's deeper in the flower. Again, that limited pollen, they're like moths, they have straw-like mouthparts, so they're not feeding on the pollen. And again, our narrow tube, kind of like that milkweed on the top there, or that coneflower, um, or they have a more of a landing pad, again, like the coneflower. Bees, these are the insects that get most of the attention when it comes to pollination, and there's a good reason for that. They're going to be our most efficient pollinators out there for the most part. They tend to like bright white, yellow, blue, or UV flowers. Nectar guides are present. Again, the fresh, mild, pleasant smell. Again, a lot of the flowers we as humans find attractive, bees are also going to find attractive. Nectar is usually going to be present. They are feeding on this. The adults, in the case of honeybees, this is what they're going to turn into honey. Pollen, limited. So kind of the chart that I took this from also has wind pollinated on there. So this is again kind of relative to wind pollinated plants, which produce a tremendous amount of pollen. A lot of times that pollen can be sticky. Again, that flower shape shallow with a landing platform or more tubular. You can see the picture on the top there, that big yellow clump on the back leg. That is pollen that bee has collected and packed onto its leg. So we'll talk a little bit more about bees just because these are kind of our best pollinators, and we do encounter these quite a bit in our landscapes. So we have our honeybee. These are not actually native to North America. They were brought over by European settlers. So they're native to Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. These are the most important bee for crop pollination, primarily because we can raise these in hives and we can transport those hives over long distances. So they will send them, a good chunk of the commercial beehives will be sent out to California to pollinate almonds, and then they will then transport those around the country pollinating different crops. These are social insects. Colonies can reach 50,000 individuals. They nest in cavities. That's why we can keep them in those honeybee hives. And they are perennial, so they will survive year after year after year. They may replace the queen, but you can't have that same colony surviving throughout the years. They are generalist pollinators, so they visit a wide variety of different flowers. But when it comes to some of our native plants, they are not terribly efficient. Our native plants and honeybees have not evolved with each other. So there are some things that some of our native bees can do, like buzz pollination, that honeybees cannot do, that some of our native plants require. So again, honeybees get most of the attention, but there are a lot of other types of bees out there, a lot of our native bees that we tend to overlook quite a bit. So just how many different types of bees are out there? About 20,000 species worldwide, 4,000 species in the U.S. Here in Illinois, we have about 500 different species. Just kind of an example, in Carlinville, Illinois, and Macoupin County, so central Illinois, there's some research been done. They've gone out and kind of looked at how many different types of insects are around in the area, and they have recorded 228 different species of bees just in that area. So a lot more than just honeybees are out there. So some of the different types that we commonly encounter in Illinois, so our bumblebees, again, probably one most people are going to be familiar with. They will do that buzz pollination, so they will vibrate their bodies. The frequency is close to a middle C, so again, some middle C musical notes, so again, some random useless information for you there. But that's going to vibrate those flowers, and some flowers need that vibration in order for them to release their pollen. So if the flower needs that type of pollination, honeybees cannot do that, so they are not going to be able to pollinate those very well. Bumblebees also tend to operate in cooler temperatures compared to honeybees. Again, you can see they're darker colored. They will vibrate themselves, warm themselves up. So it's kind of this cool weather we've been having. Honeybees may not be going out too much, but our bumblebees and some of our native bees are still probably working flowers when it's cooler. These are also social insects. Their colonies are not nearly as large, usually 50 to 400 individuals, kind of at their peak. And they're annual colonies. So they build them up over a year, then everybody dies off. They send out some queens that will overwinter, and they will start a new colony every year. Cavity nesting, so a lot of times you find these in kind of abandoned rodent burrows, stuff like that. Most of them will build and provision their own nests, so they'll go out, they'll collect their own pollen and nectar. But there are some that are parasites, so they will lay their eggs in other bumblebee species and have them raise their young for them. And these are also, for the most part, generalist bees, so they will visit a wide variety of different flowers. We've got our carpenter bees. So these are one bee that people would consider a pest from time to time. So they look similar to bumblebees, but they are much larger. And their abdomens, that back part, is kind of isn't nearly as hairy as it is in bumblebees. It's kind of the easiest way to tell them apart. So because they are large, they tend to like larger flowers, but they will also rob nectar. So on smaller flower plants, they'll go up to a flower, they'll cut a hole in the base of that flower and drink the nectar. Therefore, they're bypassing all of that pollen, so that flower is not getting pollinated. So from the flower's perspective, they're robbing it, they're stealing that nectar from them. These do nest in wood, so some people will consider them a pest if they're, building a nest in your garage, your carport, your siding, stuff like that. It's probably not something you want. Best way to prevent that is to paint that wood. They do not like painted surfaces. A lot of times that's all you have to do to prevent them from nesting in those areas. We have that one species here in Illinois. These are primarily tropical species, but we do have um, our one carpenter species in Illinois. We do have another type of carpenter bee. These are called small carpenter bees. They are much smaller. They have much weaker jaws. So they're not nesting in solid wood, but they're actually nesting in typically in the pithy centers of stems. So that's one reason when we talk about garden cleanup is that we want to leave some of those flower stalks behind in the fall to provide habitat for some of these smaller pollinators. All these flower stalks have those pithy centers that they will utilize for their nests. These are solitary, so you have one female that's going out, they're building the nest, they're collecting all the pollen, the nectar, they're laying their eggs. They're doing all that by themselves. And you can see that those individual galleries there on the picture on the bottom there, so that this particular one has 3 different galleries, so they've collected pollen balls and laid eggs in those 3 different sections. Next we have our mason bees. So these are species that show up kind of early in the year, a lot of times when our fruit trees are flowering. So these are important in orchard fertilization or pollination because these life cycles are kind of synced up with each other. They're called mason bees because they will use mud to divide their brood cells. So that picture on the bottom there, you can see that. You can see those yellow pollen balls. The female will lay a single egg on there, and they will divide those up with mud. And again, this is a single solitary female kind of doing all the work there. Leafcutter bees, very similar to our mason bees, but they're more of a summer species, and they are going to be using leaves to divide their brood cells. So you can see in the picture on the top there, they will cut these kind of circular patterns out of the margins of the leaves. They tend to like leaves that don't have a lot of veins in the thinner leaves, so stuff like roses, ash, lilac, Virginia creeper are some of the plants they tend to prefer when it comes to cutting leaves. Again, solitary, so you have this one female providing that pollen ball, laying the eggs, and dividing everything out on their own. Most of them are generalists, but there are a few species that are a little more specific, and they really only visit plants in the aster or pea families. Sweat bees, so this is a really large group of bees. A lot of times they're brightly colored, metallic colored, a lot of are green ones. Some of them can be darker in colored. Again, some of them will have banding on their abdomens, yellow and black or green or red, what have you. Called sweat bees because they are attracted to perspiration. They're trying to get the salt from your sweat and the moisture. So these may be some that may be trying to drink that sweat off of you. These are actually nesting in the ground. So these need bare patches of ground really in order to have large populations of these. Most of them are going to be solitary, but they will kind of nest in aggregation, so you'll have a bunch of them kind of nesting in the same area. All right, so that's kind of a brief overview of some of our kind of our good bugs that are out there. So some different things we can do habitat-wise to make our landscapes more attractive to them. So beneficial insect needs, obviously they need food. So they need their host or their prey in the case of predators, nectar, pollen, honeydew for our pollinators or for the adults of some of these predators. They also are going to need shelter. So in-season refuges, overwintering sites, nesting sites, stuff like that. So first off, choosing heavy pollen and nectar producing plants. So a lot of this stuff is, we kind of focus on pollinators, but this is, if you're doing pollinator gardening, you're also going to benefit our other beneficial insects or natural enemies, our predators and our parasitoids as well. If you're choosing native plants, research has been done. A lot of our pollinators tend to prefer the straight native species compared to those cultivated varieties. Sometimes those cultivated varieties, things have been changed You have your double flowers, different colors, nutrient levels may be altered as we're breeding them. So something is better than nothing, but if you can, a lot of times it's better to get that straight species rather than some of our nativars. A lot of times we push native plants, and I am as guilty as anyone of that. But a lot of our ornamental plants, our annual bedding plants, herbs, what have you, those are also good sources of nectar and pollen for our pollinators and other types of beneficial insects. So don't feel like you just have to plant native plants. There are other plants that are good at providing food resources for them as well. You want a variety of different flowers. You want flowers blooming all season. We do a real good job kind of getting stuff for the summer, maybe not so much for spring and for fall. We need that blooms throughout the year if you really want to make your landscape attractive to these insects. It's also a good idea to plant in clumps. So I have masses of plants like the picture on the top there. A single solitary plant here and there isn't going to be nearly as attractive as a bunch of different plants clustered together. Kind of think, would you rather go to 10 different grocery stores to get all your groceries, or would you rather just have to go to one place? Bunch of flowers, there's a lot more options there, a lot more attractive than having to fly all over the place to get your food. So flowers, again, a lot of our adult predators and our parasitoids feed on pollen and nectar as food resources. Um, a lot of these particular parasitoids are rather small insects. They have small mouthparts, so they tend to prefer smaller flowers. So plants that are in the carrot family, aster family, spurge or pea and bean families, a lot of these have smaller flowers, and these insects will find them much more attractive. So this picture, Queen Anne's lace, would be one that's going to be attractive to a lot of our parasitoids and our smaller pollinators. Again, a few notes on native plants. So native plants typically are plants that are recorded as growing wild in an area at the time that scientific collection began. So what exactly does that mean to you? Native will mean different things to different people. Some people are fine with if it's native to the United States, that's good enough for them. Some people want them, it has to be native to Illinois, it has to be native to their county. Again, there's kind of no one size fits all answer to what exactly native is. It depends on the individual. And just because it's native does not mean it's a good garden plant. Some of our native plants are incredibly aggressive and will quickly take over a garden. Probably not something you want. Does not mean they have fewer disease and pest problems. These plants still have diseases and pests that they will get. A lot of times we overlook them, or we are more tolerant of those in natural areas. Bring them into the garden. You're going to notice that stuff a lot more than you would when they're out kind of quote unquote in nature. Doesn't mean they're necessarily going to grow better. When we think a lot of our urban and suburban soils, a lot of that topsoil has been removed when houses are built, and it's not necessarily put back. So they may be growing in soils that they don't really like. And it also doesn't mean they're more desirable than non-natives. So say you're out in the woods, walking around, you see this little flower here, you think you like it, so you collect some, you pick it, put it in your garden. That's poison ivy. Poison ivy is a native plant. I don't think any of us really want that in our gardens, though. So just because it's native doesn't mean it's a good plant to have in the garden. So what I was talking about for season-long bloom time here, so ideally we've got stuff blooming from March in through October. So these are just a bunch of plants I threw out there. Some of these require full sun, some of them are more shade plants, but kind of get the idea here that we have multiple species blooming throughout the gardening year, throughout the growing year. So we have food resources throughout the year for these insects. Trees and shrubs, a lot of times we overlook these, and they can be important pollen and nectar resources for insects, particularly early in the year. So we think about maples, redbuds, stuff like that. A lot of times these are some of the first plants that are blooming, and going to provide that early season pollen and nectar flow for our insects. And again, our more ornamental plants also do a very good job of providing food for our pollinators. So University of Minnesota has done some research on this and looking at some of these garden cultivars and seeing which ones are most attractive. So these are just some examples from that. So on the top row, going left to right, this is Allium Purple Sensation, Salvia Victoria Blue, Zinnia Pop Art White and Red, and Marigold Bambino. And on the bottom again, right, left to right, Cosmos Capriola, Autumn Joy Sedum, Sneezeweed Dakota Gold. That's actually native, but we don't really always treat it as a native. And then sunflowers, particularly Sunfola, again, provide a lot of pollen and nectar resources. Herbs are also a good food source. So if you grow herbs and you have some start to bolt, go to flower, let them do that. Again, these have smaller flowers. A lot of our smaller insects find attractive. Most of the herbs I have growing in my garden, um, they all go to flower. I don't really try to stop them, and they're usually covered with bees, small wasps, what have you, feeding on that pollen and nectar. Um, weeds are also a good source. So that dandelion you don't want in your yard. This is a picture I took early in the year. Some of our native lady beetles feeding on that pollen and nectar. Again, they need that food resource before those aphid populations start building up, so they may turn to dandelions, clover, what have you. Those violets we're constantly trying to get rid of. That's the food source for the great spangled fritillary caterpillar. So if you want this type of butterfly around, you got to have the violets around. So a weed is a plant whose virtue has yet to be found. So if these plants are providing resources for our pollinators or beneficial insects, are they really a weed? Just a few resources for selecting plants. Again, these are focusing on native plants. In the email that I sent out, that folder, these publications are in there, so you can find those there. Again, depending on where you're at in the state, where I'm at in central Illinois, we are prairie parkland. Other parts of the state, I believe, are eastern broadleaf forests. So they do that by ecoregion, so it just kind of depends on where you are at the state. Then we have providing habitats. So again, this is primarily focusing on our pollinators, providing different layers in the landscape. You think about our typical urban or suburban landscape as that nice uniform lawn. It's not very attractive. So if you have shrubs, taller grasses, those different layers, that makes that landscape that much more attractive. If you want some of these ground nesting bees, you need bare ground for them to do that. So again, a lot of times in horticulture, we talk about mulch. We want to mulch everything, but if you want to provide some habitat for these insects, you got to leave some bare ground. Again, leaving those flower stalks behind 12 to 18 inches, so those can be utilized as habitat. Leaving dead tree trunks for wood boring bees like our carpenter bees, beetles, what have you. And again, that protection from wind and weather, kind of getting that layers in the landscape. We don't like being caught out in the rain. Insects don't either. A lot of times you'll see these nesting boxes for pollinators. So, these wood blocks. If you're going to get something like that, I would get the ones that you can take apart and clean. If you get the solid wood block, usually after 2 or 3 years, you start to get a buildup of a lot of pests and diseases, and kind of their usefulness kind of declines. When you do put these out, people are usually putting these out for pollinators, but you will get other species moving in there. So the picture on the right, that is one of our grass collecting wasps. So they will utilize that. If you see a bunch of grass stuffed in these holes, you've probably had a wasp move in there and build and lay eggs and stuff. These are solitary wasps. Again, as long as you leave them alone, they're not going to sting you. But there are other things that will move into there, and that's okay. It's good to have these other things around in your garden too. Um, Grasses, so a lot of times we focus on flowers when it comes to um, habitat and food resources for our beneficial insects, but native grasses can also provide habitat. So some of our native bunch grasses, prairie dropseed, um, scrama, little blue stem. Um, Bumblebees may build their nests near the base of that. A lot of our ground beetles will find these taller grasses attractive as well. So not only can they provide some visual interest to your landscape, they can also provide habitat for some of these beneficial insects. Kind of last slide here on our garden tips. So be willing to accept some plant damage. So remember those leaf cutter bees, they're cutting up leaves. If you want moths and butterflies, you need to have the caterpillars so they'll feed on the foliage. So again, that hornworm caterpillar that's eating your tomato plant is going to turn in to the sphinx moth, um, or it may be a host for some of your parasitoid insects. So just kind of keep that in mind. Again, if you do have populations of aphids showing up, maybe wait a little bit to see. You may have some of these natural enemies move in. They may take care of that problem for you. We want to rethink the use of pesticides. So ideally, follow integrated pest management practices. Really only use pesticides when it's necessary. If you are going to be using them, don't apply to plants when they are in bloom, so you're not poisoning pollinators. Typically do this when they're least active, so it's going to be dawn or dusk time frame. And try to select pesticides that are less harmful to pollinators and other beneficial insects. So we talk about our BTK, the Bacillus thuringiensis crustacei. That is specific to caterpillars. It is not going to affect bees, wasps, other insects. So look for stuff like that that's not real broad spectrum. And again, watch your garden, keep a journal, kind of take note of what's happening out there, what plants seem to be real attractive to pollinators and insects, maybe something you want to increase in your landscape. So that's all I've got for the presentation. So, you know, we do so Chris, Katie, and I, we write for the Good Growing blog. So if you're interested in that, you can check that out. We also have a podcast that we record weekly. Um, we discuss all kinds of landscape, garden, insect, what have you, topics in those. So feel free to give those a look. If you have any questions, there's my contact info. Feel free to send me an email. That is my office phone number. I'm not in the office, so it may be a while before I get back to you if you call that. And that's what I look like if you don't know and if you're curious. So with that, does anybody have any questions? And when we are done, I will send out an email to everybody with an evaluation if you wouldn't mind filling that out as well.